Well, good morning. It's good to have you all here and everyone joining us online. So I hope you're staying cool out there. So we started this series on Proverbs chapter 10 that is just kind of this real practical wisdom for life. And again, a couple of things to keep in mind. When you're reading Proverbs or looking at Proverbs, it's important to remember that that Proverbs is not promises, it's principles. And so when you read something out of Proverbs, don't take everything it says as like somehow God is promising that like if you do this, this will happen in some way. It's about principles. It's just trying to make us wiser. And especially chapter 10 uses a lot of these contrasting things. And part of what it does to help us see the contrasting issues is it will use these labels that you'll see throughout Proverbs, especially chapter 10, like the foolish or the wise or the scoffer or the upright or the sluggard or the dillard or the wicked and the righteous. And so when you see those, it's not trying to give like a hard definition of those things. It's using it because it wants us to picture something. And then there's going to be this issue that it's going to contrast. And that's like, this is the thing it's trying to teach us in there. And this morning, we're going to be looking at verse 24. And the question it's going to be asking us is about what we dread, right? It kind of begs this question. And so let me ask you, like, what is the thing that you dread? What, like when, even like going back to when you were a kid, what did you dread? When I was a kid, I dreaded shots, like getting a shot. The idea that I have to go get a shot, right? It's just, and I think this goes back to like, probably like in the first grade, there were a couple of times where they took like a whole class and we would all get our like immunization shots all at one time. And I just remember it's like scarred my brain, where there'd be like this whole long line of all of us kids and we're having to watch all the kids in front of us get their shots and see their reactions. So, you see one kid cry a little bit and then everyone's crying. And then, and it's screaming and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And you're just like, you go through it's very traumatic, right? And you need to go through the whole thing. Well, so I remember one time in the first grade, and I don't remember a lot about the first grade, but I do remember this. And we went through, we had all of our shots. And then probably a week or two later, I was in class one morning and I was not feeling well at all. Like my head started hurting and my joints ached and my stomach started to hurt. And I was just like not feeling good at all. And so I went to my teacher and said, I'm not feeling good or whatever. And of course, as teachers would do, she pulls out like the special slips. And it was like the nurse's slip. And she filled it all out and she said, now go to the nurse's office in there, right? So I take my little slip and I'm feeling terrible and I'm, a little kid and I'm walking to the nurse's office. But this fear, right? I'm just picturing, the last time I went to the nurse's office, they had lined up and they were giving us shots. And I'm like, man, I'm feeling really bad. I bet something this bad is only going to be cured with a shot. And I was like, I bet the nurse is going to give me a shot. She'll probably have to give me 2 shots. And my brain just started getting filled with and the needles are getting longer and fatter. And and it just overtook me. This fear of I'm walking. Why would I do this to myself? I am voluntarily walking to the nurse's office where I'm going to get 10 shots. And this is so I get part way there. And I remember there was this big planter that had a bunch of these plants in it. And I remember stopping there and I came up with the best idea, I thought. I took that little nurse's pass and I stuffed it all the way back into the bushes in that planter. And then I just hung out for a while and I was just like, I wonder how long I'd have to be at the nurse's office to get all those shots. It feels about like this time. So then I just walked back to my classroom and with a bold-faced lie, just told my first grade teacher, yeah, she checked me out and I'm fine. I'm supposed to come back to class, right? I never went to the nurse's office. So then I spent the rest of the morning feeling what? Sick, yeah. And then went to lunch and I just kept feeling worse and worse. And then that afternoon, and it just most of the day feeling awful and just got worse and worse and worse. But luckily we got past all the learning part and now it was craft time. And so the teacher was having us make like these bracelets out of these beads. And you take like, I don't know, like fishing line or something. And she had thousands of these beads in different dishes, all of these different colors. And she put us in big circles in the classroom on the floor with all of these beads. And we're making our bracelets or whatever. And I'm getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And all of a sudden, and it hit me like this. It was like a poltergeist vomiting moment. Yeah. As I hosed down all those beads, and my fellow students who are probably scarred for life, they're like, I can't wear anything with beads anymore because there was this incident that I was involved in the first grade, right? And so, of course, I think about that, and it's just like I was so miserable that whole day. I could have been home where my mom was taking care of me. Like she could have been giving me, instead of a shot, like some pain medication or something like that. I went that whole day and just felt awful. And of course, I made an impression on my fellow students as well. And I'll never forget though, and I don't know how long it was, like days later when I got over whatever it was, I walked back into my classroom. And that morning I walked back into my classroom and my first grade teacher is like, Glenn, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. And she opened up her desk drawer and pulled out the nurse's slip that I pushed in those plants. And I know, I was like, and she's like, normally students lie to like get out of class. What were you thinking? You lied to get back to class? And she's like, what were you thinking? And I was just like, I didn't want to get a shot. That's what I did. And it's just like, and you think back and it's just like, there's no logic to all of this. Except for, right, my fear of shots, like it just took over my brain. Like it took over and it did something to me, right? And that's true of all of us. At some extent, like with fear, there's something here. And when we look at this proverb, it's going to ask us to think about and process this thing about what we dread. So if you have your Bibles, look with me in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 24. And here's what it says. Here's its bit of wisdom. It says, what the wicked dread will overtake them. What the righteous desire will be granted. And you can kind of already see this thing going on, this comparison of this. But just real quick, a caveat here of what it's not trying to say. What it's not saying is to feel fear means that you're bad or wicked. That is not the point. It's not a judgment on that in any way, right? It's just using these labels for this comparison thing. It's wanting us to understand something deeper about fear. In fact, like the beginning of wisdom when it comes to fear is that fear can actually be your friend, right? Like there are moments when fear actually serves us well. I won't tell you the whole story, but in my early 20s, I got together one evening with a group of my friends and we decided to make a homemade zip line, right? I'll save the whole story for another sermon another time, but let's just say the way things turned out that evening, Mr. Fear would have been our friend, right? It would have served us well, but we didn't have any fear, and so, it didn't turn out well. And what I would say is fear maybe is the beginning of wisdom, and this proverb here isn't trying to teach us something about the beginning of the wisdom of fear. It wants to teach us something deeper, because fear can be your friend, or fear can be your enemy, right? And it's this deeper kind of understanding about fear that this particular proverb is wanting us to understand. Like there's this deeper wisdom about this. It's deeper, but it's still simple and profound in this. And it's something that we probably all deal with at one level or another. So the author starts out and he says, what the wicked dread will overtake them. Just like as a little first grader, there was a kind of fear that overtook me and ended up doing the very thing that I wanted to avoid in the first place. Because fear has the ability to just kind of hijack us in a moment. And we might think, okay, so I got hijacked, but it's understanding that there's consequences to that. And we've all seen this in one way or another. Like, ever know someone who, maybe it was a particular situation, maybe they were new at work, or there was like there was a party that they went to, or a gathering or whatever, and they had this fear of fitting in. They just felt like, man, I'm not gonna fit in, and these people aren't gonna think I'm much or whatever. And there's this fear. And the next thing you know, they're trying to like win people over to try and fit in, but like they start talking about everything that they've done, or they start bragging, or anytime someone tells a story, they've got a story where they did something bigger, better, and they're just, right, they're presenting their resume for life. And they think, and they're doing this out of fear, but what's really happening too often? They're actually pushing people away and doing the very thing that they were afraid of. But it's because fear can do this, that dread will overtake you in kind of what it's saying. Or ever know someone, maybe it's a woman who is talented, who is skilled, and she goes into a field that's dominated by men. And she's like, I'm gonna make my way in this field. And she works so hard and kind of takes on like a perfectionistic approach to it. And through, like she succeeds and succeeds, like she overcomes every barrier put in front of her. And the irony is, though, that after succeeding wildly, that she never actually enjoys the success of it, because there's this kind of perfectionistic thing that takes hold in her, because there was this fear that I'm not gonna be able to be accomplished in this field for whatever reason. And you're like, but you did succeed, but it kept you from actually enjoying whatever it was that you succeeded on, because this perfectionistic thing had you, looking at the next thing. Or maybe there's a man that you know who, maybe in his workplace, new technology was coming in. And all of these new employees coming in, like these younger people are coming in, and they've like been trained in the latest thing, and they knew the latest thing, and they're, right, they grew up on tablets and electronics and everything. And you watched him like struggle over feeling irrelevant or not being able to keep up. But out of that fear of feeling like, what if I'm not relevant? What if these new people coming up, like, and they, and they know what I don't know, that he actually started like pushing them away or discounting what they were saying. And before long, he's got a story about, like all these young people coming in here, like they don't know what they're talking about, and they haven't had experience. And he starts telling a story that just actually pushes him away from whatever he could have learned from them. And he creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, because he cuts himself off from the very thing that he was afraid of. This is what the author's trying to get at, is that what happens when fear overtakes you and it actually hurts you in some way. And so my question is, what is the thing that you dread? What is the thing that you fear? And again, there's nothing at all wrong with having fears or things that we dislike. But the author here is saying, I want you to think about, though, do those fears have a way of overtaking? In fact, the Hebrew word here for overtake, the root of this word literally means to like enter in. And it's the idea that using this root, that the overtake is like an internalizing. It's what's happening on the inside of us. And here's my, this is like a 1-point sermon here this morning. There's kind of like one point that I want you to take away from this morning out of this psalm, and it's this. What occupies your inner world eventually shapes your outer world. That's what the author is showing us. What occupies your inner world eventually shapes your outer world. And if what is occupying your inner world is some sort of fear that's taken hold, it will shape your outer world in some way, right? There's a really good example of this in Scripture. It's the story of the very first king of Israel. His name was Saul. And he became king at a young age. And the truth is, he was wildly talented. He was skillful in many, many ways. But he did have this kind of underlying insecurity about what people would think of him. He had this kind of insecurity about, like, I'm stepping into this leadership role. And he had this struggle with this insecurity. And there's kind of two snapshots that I want to look at in his life briefly here, because it'll help us see this, I think, maybe a little bit more clearly. So he comes into kingship as the very first king, and Israel is not very united. Their first king needs to unite them, and as Samuel, who was the spiritual leader of the country, is kind of leading this effort, there were people that were detractors from Saul becoming king, and there were people that were very much supporters of him. And as he does that, you can imagine, that it was kind of tenuous at times. And Samuel is moving this forward because God has actually called him to be the very first king. And so his first pivotal moment comes right after he becomes king, because he's got supporters and he's got people that are against him. And what happens is that there's a city, Jabesh, that comes under attack from a foreign group, the Amorites. And they are about ready to overthrow the city. And so what is Saul going to do? And so he actually has this great moment where he unites all of these men from all the different tribes. Like, he pulls them together, and they actually show up to help out. And no one knew this for sure, but he actually pulls together like this really good tactical military plan, and it's this 3-part plan, and he goes and he attacks them and defends the city of Jabesh, and it's like a total success, right? So imagine what's happened in the political environment there, where it was kind of this tenuous thing, and there would be supporters for him, and there'd be people against him, and all of a sudden he has this amazing moment that unites Israel, and they push back their enemy. Well, you can just feel the political winds all sway towards Saul. And imagine what happens if you were one of the detractors from Saul at this point, right? Not a great thing. And so here's how this plays out. And this is found in 1 Samuel chapter 11. And you can turn there in your Bibles, your phone. If not, we'll put it on the screens here. But in 1 Samuel chapter 11, some of the people that were the strongest supporters of Saul approach Samuel, who is the spiritual leader. And here's what they say to him. This is verse 12. The people said to Samuel, "Who was it that asked, 'Shall Saul reign over us?'" And this is a very sarcastic question, right? They know who it was. And it's because, like, look at, like, he was a great choice. Like, you know, those people that said that he shouldn't be king in this thing. And then look at the rest of verse 12, and it says, "Turn these men over to us so that we may put them to death." Like, we want to attack them. And this would be common back then. The idea that, like, when the political winds sway your way, like, you're going to take advantage of that. And I know in our day and age, we don't experience anything like this. It'd be hard for us to picture, like, political opponents that maybe would take advantage of the weakness of another political opponent. I know we don't know what that's like, but just pretend for a moment that you would understand what that would be like. And so all of a sudden, here's this moment that Saul has stepped into. And here's a moment where he could solidify his leadership in a very strong way, right? The momentum's all going his way. And especially for a guy that would be worried, right, about people that would be detractors, that like, he's got a sensitive spot in his mind over this issue. But here's what he does. Look at verse 13. But Saul said, "No one will be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel." He doesn't even wait for Samuel to give an answer to this. He steps in this moment and is saying, no, we're not going to attack people just because they didn't support us. We're not going to use this moment for that. This is a moment that needs to be about all of Israel here. We're going to allow people, right, with a different opinion in this moment. That's what they're asking for is not who I am. And it's this really strong moment that you see. He is acting with this kind of integrity to this deeper thing in this moment. And of course, we go back to what occupies your inner world eventually shapes your outer world. And so the question for us is, as Saul goes on in his reign, what will year by year by year end up occupying his inner world? And this is where we get to this second snapshot that I want us to look at here this morning. And this is many, many years later, and he is now the established king. There is no threat to him as king. It's his kingdom right now. And he seems to be doing very well. He's successful for the most part. And then there's this young man who comes along, and his name is David. And you've heard the story of David and Goliath. So this is David from the story of David and Goliath. And of course, David comes in and he kills Goliath. And what do you think people do when their response to that? They're like, wow, that's a sharp young guy who's good with a slingshot, right? And Saul sees this. And at first, he loves David. He is grateful for what David has done, actually brings him into his own house, treats him like one of his own sons, begins giving him responsibilities in his kingdom and is training him. And David just thrives, does really, really well. In fact, Saul's biological son and David become like closest friends. But remember, Saul's got this little fear, this insecurity that's in his heart. And David's popularity keeps going up and up and up and up. And this starts to mess with Saul a great deal. And so we come to this one snapshot, and this is after David has gotten a little bit older, and he has now become a very successful military leader for Saul. And they've gone off to a battle, I forgot who it was with. They're very successful, and they come back having been victorious in battle. And so you can imagine how everyone responds when they come back. In fact, this is found in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 7. And this is what it says about the people. As they danced and sang, right? So Saul and David come into the city, and the people are dancing and singing because it's party time. Everyone's happy. Almost everyone is happy, right? And here's the little ditty that they sang, the little song that they sang. It's this: Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Right, you kind of get a feel for the song, right? And then in verse 8, I love what this passage does, because it gives us Saul's inner dialogue. It tells us what he was thinking and what he was saying to himself. Here's verse 8. Saul was very angry. This refrain, this song, displeased him greatly. And here's what he says to himself. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but with me only thousands. Right? And here's the story, right? This is the story that he's telling himself. And here's this last part that I want you to see. What more can he get but the kingdom? Wow, that's a jump. Like, you get a song and now you get the whole kingdom. I mean, like, it's just like, whoa. But what's happened? Well, fear and insecurity have taken hold. It's just internalized. And this threat has just kept building and building until just he goes this different direction, because what occupies your inner world eventually shapes your outer world in this. And what we see in the next scene here is that David and Saul have gone home. David is playing the harp. Picture like a teenager playing his electric guitar in his room or whatever. He's just over there playing all by himself. And this thing begins to build in Saul. And there's a spear standing up there, and Saul grabs this and just reflexively in his anger and in his fear, picks that spear up and hurls it at David, intending to kill isn't able to kill him. But this becomes a turning point where now Saul will go on to spend the rest of the days of his life hoping to catch and kill David. But here's the irony in this, friend. Here's what I want you to see in this. This is the man who despised retribution. This is the man who had real enemies at one point and said, I refuse to go after them. Retribution is not how we're going to operate here. And now in this moment, he is actually doing the very thing he was once against. And you go, why? Because Saul became this evil, terrible. No, it happened because his fear internalized just overtook him. And now he's doing the very thing he does not want to do. He's doing the thing that he hates. See, that, and what the author of Proverbs is wanting us to understand is like, you need to become wise about what fear or dread can do in your life. It can actually do this. So I think about this, and no one would be surprised if you've been here at any length of time, you would know that I don't like religious legalism. When I think about religious legalism, I don't have good thoughts. I don't like it at all. The irony to that a little bit, though, is I would say there was a time in my life where I was kind of legalistic in a spiritual or religious way. I like the way I saw Scripture as a rule book, and I could be kind of judging, and I would get into any argument about the Bible, and it was about proving that I'm right and we're right, and all of these things. And then through a lot of soul searching and God being God, walked me on a journey where I started to see that in a wholly different way. And I remember, and I share all of this with you, because as I got to that place, I despised religious legalism, because I saw what it did. I saw what it did to well-meaning people that were trying to connect to God. I saw what it did in how the Bible got weaponized and used as how it became all about being right or being righteous, and it would divide people and all the things that I hated about it. And I still hate religious legalism for what it does. But I remember being in a classroom here. It was on a Sunday morning, and I was in one of our Sunday groups. Someone else was preaching, and this whole issue came up in the class. And I remember someone was kind of advocating for something that was kind of very legalistic. It was like, no, there's a Bible verse right here, and here's the thing. And I remember I got engaged with this conversation. And maybe I got engaged with a little bit more energy than I realized. And I was driving my point home. And because I hate religious legalism and what it does and all this stuff. And I remember after the class, there was someone that I knew pretty well, and he said, so do you ever think about maybe you're becoming legalistic about legalism? Yeah, that's what he said. And I remember my first thought was, no, that's stupid. You can't be legalistic about legalism. I'm right about this. Because I've got a verse. And I was like, whoa, I'm kind of sounding legalistic about legalism. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And I realized there was this beautiful thing, right, that I wanted to move towards, but there was also this thing, and I saw all the reasons why it was bad and why it should be feared and why it wasn't good. But it was also wanting to occupy my inner world in a deeper kind of way, to the point that I could be judgy about being judgy. I could be legalistic about legalism. And that the same kind of energy that I once brought at one point, that I would look back and go, man, I'm so glad I outgrew that. The irony was I was actually doing the same thing, just in a different direction. And I was like, I don't want to be that. For me, it's like I don't want to cultivate my heart around what I hate. I don't want to cultivate my heart based on what I'm against or what I believe to be wrong. Because somehow it can actually turn you into the thing that you dislike so much? And so he says, right, the wicked are like they're overtaken by what they despise because it's what occupies their inner world. And the truth is, we've all had moments where there's the thing that we dislike, or there's the thing that we fear. We fear being alone or disconnected or becoming irrelevant. We fear, maybe it's something in the world. You wake up in the morning and you watch the news and you're just like, oh man, the world's a scary place. And it is a scary place at times. But do you want all of those fears and anxieties and all of those things to be the thing that ends up shaping your heart? Because maybe if those are the things that end up shaping your heart, it won't take you to the place of who you really want to be, see? And so here's what I love about this proverb, because it holds this kind of wisdom for all of us who find ourselves in the tension of not wanting to be the thing that we dislike, and yet there's this kind of tension that keeps pulling us toward becoming the thing we dislike in a weird way. And so it says, what the wicked dread will overtake them, what the righteous desire will be granted, right? And this is the turn in this proverb, and says, so if you don't want to be overtaken by what you dread, then you've got to get in tune with your desire. What is the beautiful thing here? In the Hebrew, this word for desire, the root word for it is the Hebrew word beauty. I love this. Like, what is the beautiful thing? You know what I had forgotten in that class is I stood in that class and I was like, no, that's wrong. I'm going to argue against all those things, right? What's the beautiful thing that I wanted for everyone in that classroom? What's the beautiful thing that God did in me that moved me out of that kind of legalistic approach so many years earlier? What the author's trying to do is saying, you got to get back in touch with that, because that's the thing that will actually pull you toward who you want to be or what you want to do. There is a kind of desire that is a really good thing. It is the beautiful thing in this. So I want to just close out here with two thoughts on how to kind of turn that corner, okay? How do I turn the corner? Once I so this thing over here doesn't get a hold of me. And so here's the first thing. First thing is this. What is the beautiful thing deeper than your dread? I promise you, whatever the thing is that you dread, whether it's something deeply personal or it's something that makes you feel insecure, there is something more beautiful underneath that you really want. Maybe it's a sense of connection. Maybe it's a sense of feeling like I really get to operate out of my worth in God, or there's a purpose that I have in this world that really matters. Or maybe it's very exterior. Maybe it's a thing where you just like, I am worried about someone in my family, or I'm worried about my kids, or I'm just worried about the world, and I've got all these fears about all those things. I promise you, there is something beautiful underneath that fear that matters to you. And it's why you have a fear about that thing. There's something that you want in the world that is a beautiful thing that you would want for this world. There's a beautiful thing that you would want for your kids, for your spouse, your friend. And making sure we're clear on that becomes really important. And I remember for me, simply put, it was the centrality of Jesus Christ. It was what Jesus modeled and taught. It was what Jesus represents as an image of who God really is. I fell in love with that. The truth is, that's what walked me out of a kind of religious legalism where the Bible gets weaponized. Like all of a sudden, the Bible wasn't a thing to, prove other people were wrong. It became this gorgeous story that gave me a picture of who God was in a more beautiful way. But I was losing that a little bit because I was mad about all the religious legalism going on, right? But that picture of the centrality of Christ, that was the thing I had to get a hold of. So, what is the thing that you've got to get a hold of? Find that beautiful thing, right? Second thing, trust what God is doing in you and how he feels about you. And what I mean by this is, starting off with this idea of trust, is you've got to take a step. There's got to be action. So when you see the beautiful thing and identify it, it's like you've got to trust that. Take a step. What does it look like to actually live out the beautiful thing? Saul does this beautifully in that first snapshot, right? If he's saying, I want a kingdom that's united and I don't want us fighting with one another. And and he steps in and says, like, nobody's dying today, right? Like he took a step. And when he took that step, there was a risk to it, right? He had to trust God in this moment, because it could have been that it's like that group of followers that he had. They could have said, well, you're not the person we thought you were. We'll go find someone else. And that would have been a real fear for Saul. And yet in that moment, it's like he took a step to actually trust what God was doing in his life. And it's later on with David that he actually won't trust God. He won't trust God's timing in it. And every time we take a step of trusting God, we are strengthening that image and that picture of the beautiful thing of who we want to be and what we want to be. And so take a step of what that looks like. Find a way to live that out. I think about like the person who's feeling like I'm getting pushed aside at work. I'm the one that's becoming irrelevant. And it's because of all those young people, those younger generations. And there's such a temptation to start coming up with a narrative about, those younger generations that are all lazy and they don't care about their work. And they just want, technology to do all the work. And you can come up with all these negative things. And what is that doing for you? Not much. But what if that same person said, the beautiful thing I'm after here is I want to have purpose. I want to feel like when I show up to work that I've got teammates and what I add to this matters and that I'm of value in this. What if instead of leaning into a story out of fear, that person actually leaned in and said, teach me something. I want to learn from you in this. Because here's what we always forget. That person standing over here, they've got a story going. And they hear all those things happening. And you know what they're thinking? They're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm brand new at this. I've never done this. And this guy's been here forever. And he knows everything. And he doesn't think I'm much. And it's just, I'd do anything to impress that guy, right? And we don't realize that story's going on. What happens, right, if all of a sudden this person starts to trust God in a different way, instead of living out of his fears, actually say, you know what, I'm going to offer something good. Maybe I'll offer some encouraging words in this. All of a sudden, right, that young person is like, oh man, you're such an encouragement. Thank you. And all of a sudden, that person who was so fearful might find that they are loved and adored by the people around them. And that they're actually not irrelevant at all, right? Because now they've pulled into the beautiful thing that they want, and it's actually shaping them in a different way. So, two things, friends. You got to see what the beautiful thing is, and then you've got to take some tangible steps to live it out, because it will then become solidified in you. Because the reality is, what occupies your inner world eventually shapes your outer world. And this proverb leaves us with this question, right? What will occupy your heart? Will it be what you dread, or will it be what you desire? You get to apply that wisdom to your life. Before I close this out here, and notice it's maybe not early, but it's a little early, okay? So if you've got kids in the children's area, they may not be ready just yet. And when you go over there, you can say miracles do happen, and a little early. If you're a guest here this morning, I just want to say it is a pleasure to have you here, and I would love to personally welcome you here this morning. In fact, I'm going to be right over here in the Next Steps area, and would love to welcome you this morning. If you are interested in maybe serving in our adults communities area that they talked about earlier, you can go right over here, and we'll have some wonderful people that can answer questions, get you signed up, take care of whatever is there. Why don't you stand? And let me just close us with a blessing this morning. May God just shine his face upon you, and may he fill your heart and your mind with what is beautiful and good from him to you. Amen. Have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next week.